Have you ever heard the advice, don't add online multiplayer to your first game? Well, I decided to ignore that advice, because, really, how hard could it possibly be?
I'm in the sad zone.
I'm stuck
I'm
as
stuck,
well.
too.
Hello?
I'm also now stuck in the train.
Wait, what's the...
Oh my god, what was that noise? The game is so loud right now.
Oh,
Oh.
what?
Oh my god. It hasn't gone, I wouldn't say swimmingly, but no one leave the lobby right now, please. Okay, I think it's officially broken now. Are we jumping next to each other?
Wait, no, I'm going in reverse now. I'm going up the hill. No. No.
Don't go up the hill.
No, dude, again.
Alright, time for the part that I can never get past, is the train.
Okay, so it turns out that making an online multiplayer Mario Kart inspired ski racing game isn't quite as easy as I thought. This devlog is all about our journey to get the game ready for online playtesting. But before we get into it, one quick announcement. Yep, it only took a year and a half, but the game finally has a name. I'll just be calling it Super G for short. There's a link in the video description to the updated Steam page if you're interested in wishlisting the game. And alright, let's get into it. Not long after the last devlog, I did the first playtest over Steam. I called up Greg, who had been helping with asset design, and after about an hour of struggling, we were finally able to join the same lobby and we started the first game. Now, it had been a while since I tested much of the online multiplayer, so I was a bit worried about how this would go, and it turns out rightfully so. Some highlights include bombs flying right through the map, poorly calibrated jumps, weird spinning effects, lots of things that only show up on the host player's screen. And of course, the AI being completely helpless. So I got to work fixing these bugs one by one, and I also took some time to make some tweaks to the gameplay. For instance, when skiing, instead of gliding against walls or getting stuck to them, I added a bounce behavior that is triggered when a player has enough speed. And the bounciness factor can change depending on the material of the object that you're hitting. As I was playing around with this change, I realized it was a pretty easy way to turn around and start skiing backwards, and I actually think that could be pretty useful. Then, a few days later, the time had come for Josue to finally try the game. Admittedly, I was a bit nervous since Josue had seen so much of the game but never played it, but it turned out to be a lot of fun.
This is so fucking dope! Dude, this is so slick, man. These animations, like the head turning. So that's interesting. So because you have this mechanic where you can...
We spent some time discussing movement mechanics. For instance, the difficulty of initiating reverse skiing. And we talked about what felt intuitive and what felt kind of strange. Skiing uphill, for example. So I took notes on all of this, but we also had something else to discuss. If you remember in the last video, I mentioned that we're working on a vertical slice of the game, a short but polished preview of what we want the final version of the game to be. And to get the quality of level design that we're looking for, we needed to go back to the drawing board. Josue drew concept art for a new level we're calling Downhill Demo. The map has 5 distinct sections and gradually introduces you to the mechanics and world of the game. It starts by getting the player used to the tight turning controls, having them ski down this snaking path from the peak of the mountain. It then goes into this massive jump where the player gets a lot of airtime and some perspective on the world below. Next, the player lands in the shipping and receiving area, where they're introduced to moving obstacles and threats as they weave their way between cargo trains and shipping containers. And the third section leads into a cave sequence where we introduce the player to branching paths and shortcuts. The sea cave on top actually has a secret opening, but we'll leave that a mystery for now. After working out some of the high-level details, I began work on the map. Once again, I explored a few different ways of building this map, and thought a lot about whether I should design this in Blender or Unreal. So I spent a few days experimenting with different workflows before I landed on an all-new approach where I would design the paths point by point in Blender and then use a custom geometry node setup to kind of stick the mountain to the path. Then I just render out the mountain as a height map, and I used that height map to generate a landscape in Unreal. But there was still one feature missing from the game that would actually impact the design of the rest of the level. So the next thing I worked on was the jetpack ability. The idea behind the jetpack was to add a unique mobility item that could help players take shortcuts and avoid traps and obstacles. I struggled for a while with how we could add this item without completely breaking the game. Obviously the jetpack should have a limit, so you can't just, fly off into outer space. But how high should it go? If it goes really high, how is the player supposed to survive this fall? And if it's too low, that's just kinda lame. Then I had the idea, what if upon reaching max height, the rocket automatically deploys a glider type mechanic that can safely bring you back down to ground level? This solves the fall damage issue, and if we add a duration to the hover pack, this can also prevent players from taking massive skips in the level. So this is what I worked on, and you can see here the placeholder assets I used for testing. Now, how does that affect the map? Well, since I added the hover mechanic, we figured it would be kind of cool to include that in the big jump sequence at the end of the first mountain. So here's what the untextured landscape was looking like in Unreal. And here you'll see I'm testing out the jetpack and hover pack on the big jump. Now it was time to add back in our snowy landscape materials and path decals. After this, I hopped on a call with Josue to discuss the progress on the map. We did a run through the full course, and the full duration came out to around 3 minutes, which we were both pretty happy with. And I also got some feedback on the shipping and receiving area.
I think we have to widen that valley, because imagine if like the train carts were coming out, hazard cart, opening, hazard cart, you'd have very little time to figure out when that opening is coming.
So what are the hazard carts Josue was mentioning? Well, they're part of the first major obstacle of the course, the cargo trains. I got to work on a new blueprint that would create dynamic train tracks along a spline. The construction of the tracks and the cave entrances was actually the easy part. The more difficult part was synchronizing the movement of the train on the client and the server. You could attempt to do this by constantly replicating the location and rotation data for each car, but as you can imagine, this scales pretty poorly. The more cars, the more network bandwidth required. It also has the issue of the client train always being behind the server version by at least as long as it takes for the data to travel from one to the other. So how do we get around this? Well, if we know that the movement of our train is deterministic, we can calculate the location and rotation of each car in the train by replicating only the elapsed time of the simulation. In other words, if we know our train always moves down the track at a constant speed, we can perfectly represent the state of all the cars based on only the elapsed time. Now we can keep our trains in sync by replicating just one number, and we still have the issue of the client being behind the server because the server train keeps moving after sending the update. But we can now forward predict this time value on the client by accounting for the data travel time, at least with our best estimate. This way, what the client sees on their screen should almost perfectly represent the position and rotation of the cars on the server at the same time. And by making the order of the cars in the train deterministic, we can also replicate the sequence of different types of cars without any additional network requests. I would use the same approach for synchronizing the flying drones. I laid out paths for the drones and moved them along those paths using server time, just like I did for the trains. The movement arc of the dropped crate is also completely deterministic and based on the location and rotation of the drone at its determined dropping point. I basically used this function to plot out all of the points of the falling crate and lerp between them. The other advantage of this kind of approach is that it'd be very easy to fast forward or reverse in a replay system, which is a bit of a pipe dream, but still. I found I could use this server time value to synchronize a lot of different moving props in the level. But with as much success as I was having with the networked obstacles, I was finding new issues with my custom skiing movement. As you can see here, I was occasionally running into these terribly frustrating hiccups when simulating network conditions. Basically, the client and server were occasionally getting out of sync, and it results in this pretty jarring effect. After struggling with this for many months now, I finally decided to get some help. I'd heard some very good things about a plugin called GMC, and I decided to try it out. I'm not really a plugin or add-on type of guy, but I immediately saw the benefit of moving all the networked movement over to this new system. This did of course mean that I would be rewriting all of the movement physics and stuff all over again, but at this point I've kind of accepted that I have to do this stuff every few months. And this was no small factor. After getting the movement working in a test project, I actually spent several days fixing missing reference errors and just generally trying to get the game back to where it was before. And to my great relief, at the end of all of this, I had fixed nearly all of the issues with net corrections during standard skiing gameplay, making character movement in online games nearly indistinguishable from local play. So, back to level design. I went about laying down decals and boundary obstacles on the path. These really help to break up the look of the snow and also give players a sense of how fast they're going. In the future, I want to get more creative with these decals. Another thing that I've done over and over again, but feel like I get better at every time, is rocks. Here's a new method that I started doing during the sculpting process, where I use the grab brush to just kind of mess up the edges of the rocks. I feel like this helps make my new rocks look more natural and less low poly, if that makes sense. And here's what all that looks like after adding the new rocks and trees. Then I got to the really fun part as I started modeling some of the machinery. And I will let Josue talk a bit more about the design process here.
One of the ways I thought about level design was thinking about theme park rides. Those carts on a track amusements where you're not just being taken for a ride, but also being told a story through the props, environments, and characters. I kept this in mind when designing the art for Downhill Demo, making sure that the eye line of the player would be guided by a visual point of interest. After working out the rough track outline, I began to work on splash art to give Solomon and Greg a snapshot of how the different sections of the level should look and feel. The summit is a pretty standard alpine setting, but in the ski jump portion of the level, the story begins to unfold a bit as we stumble upon one of Mechanico's busy shipping bays. The player can start to make out from the distance that they're going to have to watch out for many dangers. We had a lot of new props and buildings that needed to be modeled for this area. Solomon did a great job at rendering the concept art, even embellishing with his own details. Around this time of the level design, you may have noticed I also redesigned the item boxes. I want them to look more like CRT televisions, perhaps an obsolete product from the Mechanico Electronics division. Past the shipping bay, we take a turn toward a small oasis in the snowy landscape of the mountain. Since we are dealing with so much snow, color plays an important part in distinguishing areas of interest from the piece the player skis on. This is still early stages in the in-game level, but introducing greenery and water features into our levels will be a useful technique to add to our level design toolset.
Is it working? This camera? Okay, cool. We're really happy about how the level is coming along, but we still have a lot of work to do to really flesh it out and make it fit into the wider world of the in-game universe, which leads us to our next announcement. In-game ads. We're just joking. Well, we're kind of joking. We want the world of Super G to be a caricature of the modern day, where corporations shove their brands down your throat, influencers hawk useless health and beauty products, and robots are slowly replacing everything that you hold dear. We would like to get your help to flesh out the world of the game by designing the kinds of brands, products, and ads that you imagine in the world of Super G. To participate, you will need to create a visual for your idea. This could be a logo, a product, or a mascot, along with a catchy slogan, and lastly, an in-game description of how your idea fits into the world of Super G. In the Discord server, share your concepts in the ideas and feedback channel. Under the thread, community event, your ad here. We'll pick some of our favorite ideas to illustrate and include in the game. You could even make a cheeky ad for a project you're working on. Just remember, it's all satire, and the funnier the better. Good luck.
Alright, back to level design. One part of the new level I found particularly challenging was the 3 different paths through the ice tunnel. Here's a very early prototype version. Josue and I hopped on a call to discuss the direction of the sequence a bit more.
That's fun. Oh, right into the shock! Like, I think when I first designed the spark plug hazard, I think like I designed them as if they were in a smaller space, meaning that like they don't look as like dangerous. Does that make sense?
Right. Obviously I just kind of threw it together and slapped the ice texture on it, but I've been kind of struggling with like how do you make this look good, because it kind of looks kind of wacky right now. Well put, former version of myself. The cave did indeed look kinda wacky, but not long after this, I found a solution to get the cave walls closer to the look we wanted. Instead of manually moving around vertices like I had done previously, I used a displacement modifier in Blender, combined with a few subdivisions to get the natural bumpy look. Combined with an ice shader I shamelessly stole from a YouTube tutorial, the wall was looking pretty convincing. And because it's a non-destructive workflow, it's so much easier to make changes than my old method. The date of the playtest was rapidly approaching, so Josue and I met up once more with a to-do list of things we had to get done before then. We decided Josue would work more on the level design of the cave area, and I would wrap up work on the last few item combos. What do I mean by item combos? Well, if you want a more detailed explanation, it might be worth going back and watching the previous devlog, but essentially the items that are rewarded to players in the game are a combination of two different item types. For instance, a single rocket gives you a butane boost, a rocket and explosive gives you the penguin missile, a rocket and a rocket gives you the jetpack. Now, if we want to include the explosive, rocket, and freezing types in the upcoming playtest, we have to finish implementing a couple item combos that we haven't got to yet. Here's us discussing how we can prototype some of these items to at least have something working in the demo in a couple days.
Basically, like, if you wanted to reskin one of the yellow bombs to blue, and basically it's like you're throwing the ice effect.
What if we have the ice bomb when you throw it? Like, I could make it spawn a bunch of ice that you can slip on and a bunch of like ice fillers, so it like freezes an area like that. And so, while Josue started work on the sea cave tunnel design, I got to work on the first missing item, the Cooler Master. This would essentially spawn a snowstorm smokescreen behind the player to inhibit the viewing conditions of everyone behind them. This was a pretty easy one to prototype all in all, most of the work being this really mediocre particle system. That's kind of nice.
That's it? Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that's the ability. You make everyone blind.
Pretty much. We streamed on Twitch for 7 hours straight that day, and only ended up talking about Splatoon 6 different times, which is actually lower than average.
I move, yeah, I roll, and I feel the melody, you better ink.
Is that
Splatoon?
Splatoon? And here is me working on the last prototype item, the Frigidaire projectile, which you'll see more of shortly. And so the day of reckoning had finally come. I still had a number of small bugs to fix, but at this point I was really tired of delaying, so in the words of Bill O'Reilly,
"We'll do it live! F*** it! Do it live!"
I got everybody in a Discord call, and after a bit of troubleshooting, we all managed to get in the same lobby. The yellow number that shows up next to the player's name is their ping, and it was at this point I realized I need more US West Coast friends. So we started the game, and I was kind of pleased to see that everything was working. We had 8 people in a lobby, continents apart, all flying down the same hill. For the first 15 seconds, at least, suddenly I was struck by a penguin missile I didn't even see coming, and upon respawn, I realized that, that respawn is broken. Oh, I got mega stuck.
I feel lonely up here.
And you just kinda be stuck there for the rest of the race. This would be the biggest and most frustrating bug of the day, but there were some others. One particularly insufferable bug was the sound issue, where the host player of the game would gradually hear more and more overlapping sounds, and by the end of the race it really did feel like you were losing grip on reality.
Oh my god,
I was spamming the alt.
Wait.
I also realized that the 8-player limit I set up for game lobbies was more of a suggestion than a rule. Did we have like 9 join or something? This is crazy.
Okay.
Oh, it's handling it.
This is
Character is off screen.
It's kind of... Alright, so the alpha test was buggy. I mean, this thing can make CrowdStrike blush, but was it a failure? No, because now I have a nice list of bugs to fix, and to be honest, a lot of these bugs I wouldn't have found if it weren't for the playtests. The respawning issue, for example, I fixed several days after the alpha test, and it turns out it was due to some of the quirks of using GMC on a non-dedicated server. This is super inconvenient to test locally, so I can only imagine how long it would have taken me to find this issue if I hadn't started playtesting. Alright, so what's next for the game? Well, the next couple weeks I'll be streaming nearly daily, cleaning up bugs, and sharing new builds of the alpha test every few days. If you're interested in being a tester, make sure to join the Discord. Also, if you haven't already, please consider wishlisting the game on Steam and subscribing here on YouTube. Oh, and I promise I'm going to get back on a more frequent devlog schedule. Sorry it's been a while. Okay, alright, thanks so much for watching and following along, guys. Ciao!